Vikings didn't wear horned helmets. Napoleon wasn't short. And no Romans didn't have special rooms where they'd throw up and go back to eating. Which is wild because I definitely learned that in school. Turns out a lot of history is just made up. And once a story gets popular enough, no one bothers to correct it. So let's fix that. This video is about all the facts you've heard your entire life that are just wrong. Not debatable. Not well actually it's complicated, just straight up invented. And here's the thing, these didn't survive because people forgot the truth. They survived because the lie was better. More dramatic. Easier to remember. Better for propaganda. So, we're gonna go through the most famous fake facts in history, explain what actually happened, and this is the fun part. Tell you who made it up and why it stuck. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Let's start with one that everyone gets wrong. Vomitoriums. You've heard this one. Rich Romans would eat until they were stuffed, walk into a special room called a vomitorium, puke everything up, and then go back to the banquet and keep eating. Decadent. Disgusting. Iconic. Also completely fake. A vomitorium was an exit hallway in a stadium, like the tunnels people used to leave a football game. It's called that because crowds would spew forth from the building. That's it. That's the whole thing. But of course people heard the word vomit and went, oh, Romans must have been barfing in there. Because we love the idea that ancient civilizations were just wildly unhinged all the time. And once that image stuck, no one cared about the architecture. So where did this come from? Basically, root word confusion, plus a lot of modern retellings that love the decadent Rome aesthetic. And now, it's in every random history trivia list forever. Cool. Great. Moving on. Vikings. Horned helmets. You've seen the image 1,000 times. Except, nope. There is zero archaeological evidence that Vikings wore horned helmets in battle. Zero. And if you think about it for like 5 seconds, it makes sense horns would be terrible in combat. They'd get caught on things. They'd give your opponent something to grab. They'd throw off your balance. So where'd this come from? 19th century opera costumes. Specifically, Wagner productions. Designers wanted Vikings to look dramatic, so they added horns, and then everyone just ran with it. Museums, textbooks, pop culture. Everyone copied the opera version because it looked cooler. Oh, and while we're here, Vikings also didn't drink from enemy skulls. That one comes from a mistranslation of an old poem. The original phrase was about drinking from curved horns, but someone translated as skulls, and now we've got this whole brutal Viking image that's basically fan fiction. Napoleon, short king, little bony, the guy who conquered half of Europe because he had a complex about his height. Except he wasn't short. He was 5'6" to 5'7", which was average for French men at the time, slightly above actually. So why does everyone think he was tiny? 2 reasons. 1. British propaganda. They drew him as a little angry man in cartoons because it was funny and made him seem less threatening. 2. Unit conversion confusion. French inches were different from English inches, so when people recorded his height, it got translated wrong, and everyone just assumed he was a tiny rage goblin. And now we have Napoleon complex as a term based on a guy who was regular sized. History is fun. Okay, real talk for a second. Notice the pattern here? A lot of these myths survive because they're emotionally satisfying. Romans were decadent, so of course they had puke rooms. Vikings were brutal, so of course they wore scary helmets. Napoleon was ambitious, so of course he was overcompensating. The truth is boring. The myth is memorable. And once a story becomes part of how we understand history like, part of the cultural shorthand, it's almost impossible to kill. Which brings us to the really wild ones. Let them eat cake. You know the story. French people are starving. Marie Antoinette hears about it and she's like, oh, they don't have bread? Let them eat cake then. Out of touch. Cruel. Iconic villain moment. She never said it. There's no record of her saying this. None. In fact, the phrase existed before she even arrived in France. It shows up in Rousseau's writing as something a great princess supposedly said, but he wasn't talking about her. But when the French Revolution needed a villain, they pinned it on her. Because she was foreign, unpopular, and easy to blame. And now, centuries later, we still repeat it like it's fact. Which is kind of the point. If a story is useful for someone, it sticks. Even if it's fake. George Washington. Wooden teeth. Classic piece of trivia, right? Wrong. His dentures were made from ivory, metal, and human teeth. Animal teeth, too. But not wood. The wooden look probably came from ivory staining over time. And here's the part that makes this worse. There's a ledger entry and actual payment record that mentions Washington paying Negroes for 9 teeth, which means some of those teeth likely came from enslaved people. So yeah, not wood, way darker than the myth. And this is what happens when we sanitize history and defund trivia. We miss the actual story. Okay, this one drives me insane. Columbus proved the Earth was round when everyone thought it was flat. Nope. Educated Europeans in the 1400s already knew the Earth was spherical. That wasn't the debate. The debate was about how big it was. Columbus thought the Earth was smaller than it actually was, which is why he thought he could sail to Asia. He was wrong. He just got lucky and hit the Americas instead. But in the 1800s, Washington Irving wrote a dramatized biography of Columbus and invented the whole flat Earth thing to make the story more heroic. And then it got taught in schools, and now we're stuck with it. It's like we wanted a version of history where one brave guy fought against ignorance. Even if that's not what happened. The Iron Maiden. Spiked coffin. Medieval torture device. Absolutely brutal. Also fake. There's no evidence these were actually used in medieval times. The famous examples? Built in the 1700s and 1800s for museum exhibits. People in the 18th century loved the idea of a dark ages, full of sadistic torture devices. So they just made some. For vibes. And then everyone believed it was real. Museums were kind of the original clickbait. Here's one that's pure propaganda. World War II. Polish cavalry charges German tanks on horseback. Swords versus armor. A tragic, hopeless last stand. Great story. Didn't happen. What actually happened? Polish cavalry successfully charged infantry. Then armored cars showed up, opened fire, and they had to retreat. That's it. That's the real story. But Nazi propagandists spun it as, look how backwards Poland is, and it worked. And then other countries repeated it for their own reasons. And now it's a symbol of futility, based on a lie designed to mock them. That's how propaganda works. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be repeated. So, history isn't just about what happened, right? It's about what people wanted to believe happened. And once a story becomes part of the culture, once it's in textbooks, museums, movies, it's almost impossible to undo. But now you know. And you can be that person at parties who goes, actually vomitoriums were hallways. If you learned something, or if I just ruined a fun fact you loved, leave a comment. Tell me which myth hit the hardest. And subscribe, because I've got a whole list of things we were lied to about and we're just getting started. See you in the next one.